I want you to picture a man named Ronald Read. And for those of you listening right now who might feel like, the financial deck is just completely stacked against you, Ronald's story is going to, well, it's going to completely reset your baseline.
Oh, absolutely. It completely shatters the traditional narrative.
Right. So he was born in rural Vermont, first person in his entire family to graduate from high school, and he only managed to do that by hitchhiking to the campus every single day.
Hitchhiking.
Yeah, literally hitchhiking. And his career was just as, unassuming. He spent 25 years fixing cars at a local gas station. And then he transitioned to sweeping floors. He was a janitor at JCPenney for another 17 years.
Just a completely normal working class guy.
Exactly. I mean, he bought a 2-bedroom house for $12,000 when he was 38, lived in that exact same house for the rest of his life, and his main hobby was, get this, chopping firewood.
Right, which is just so incredibly low-key.
So low-key. He was a quiet, totally ordinary guy. But then he dies in 2014 at the age of 92, and that is when this rural janitor suddenly makes international headlines.
Just because of what they found in his estate.
Yes. When his estate was settled, it was revealed that Ronald Read, the gas station attendant, had a net worth of over $8 million.
Which is, it's a statistical anomaly of the absolute highest order. If you look at the data in our source material, it points out that out of the nearly 3 million Americans who died in 2014, fewer than 4,000 of them had a net worth over $8 million.
Wow.
Yeah. Ronald Read, a guy who spent his entire life wearing a mechanic's shirt and pushing a broom, was in that ultra-elite fraction of a percent.
And the craziest part is there was no secret lottery ticket. There was no, hidden inheritance from a rich uncle or some obscure legal settlement, nothing like that.
He just saved.
He just saved whatever tiny fraction of his modest paycheck he could, put it in blue-chip stocks, and then he just waited. He let those tiny savings compound for decades until he had millions. He actually left $2 million to his stepkids and over $6 million to his local hospital and library.
That's incredible.
It really is. Now, I want you to hold the image of Ronald Read in your mind, because to really understand what we're going to unpack today, we have to look at his polar opposite.
Ah, yes. Richard Fuscone.
Exactly. I want to introduce you to Richard Fuscone. If you were to build, the ultimate financial powerhouse in a laboratory, you would build this guy.
Yeah, he was the textbook definition of elite.
Totally. He had an MBA from Harvard. He was a massively successful, highly decorated executive at Merrill Lynch. I mean, the former CEO of Merrill Lynch publicly praised his business savvy.
Right. He was on Crane's prestigious 40 under 40 list.
Yeah, he checked every single box. He was so successful that he actually retired in his 40s to become a philanthropist.
He had the pedigree, the Ivy League education, the elite network, the astronomical salary. Society tells us that those are the absolute prerequisites for financial supremacy.
Right. But then, so in the mid-2000s, Fuscone borrows heavily to expand this 18,000 square foot mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. We are talking about a house with 11 bathrooms, 2 elevators, 2 pools, and 7 garages. It cost over $90,000 a month just to maintain the property.
90 grand a month just in maintenance. That's insane.
It's wild. But then the 2008 financial crisis hits, and while Ronald Read was quietly letting his stocks compound up in Vermont, Richard Fuscone was utterly destroyed.
Because of the high debt.
Exactly. High debt and illiquid assets left him bankrupt. He literally stood before a bankruptcy judge in 2008 and said he currently had 0 income.
Wow.
His Palm Beach house was foreclosed on. And then in 2014, and this is just a bizarre twist of fate, just 5 months before the janitor Ronald Read died and left millions to charity, Richard Fuscone's Greenwich mansion was sold in a foreclosure auction for 75% less than it was valued at.
The contrast is just, it's jarring. And it brings us to the core premise of our entire discussion for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We have to ask ourselves, in what other specialized, high-stakes field does someone with absolutely no college degree, no formal training, and 0 industry connections completely outperform someone with the best education in the world?
Right, because you would never, ever see a guy who sweeps floors casually jump in and design a safer nuclear reactor than the world's top physicists.
No, of course not.
You don't see an amateur off the street performing open-heart surgery while the Harvard-trained cardiologist just fumbles with the scalpel. It just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen because engineering and medicine are hard sciences. But finance, as we were really going to explore today, is not a hard science. It's a soft skill. It is heavily dictated by how you behave, not by what you know or, how complex your spreadsheets are. Ronald Read had the behavioral trait of patience.
And Fuscone had greed.
Exactly. Richard Fuscone fell victim to greed and over-leverage. And that single behavioral difference was powerful enough to completely eclipse the massive gap in education and intellect between those two men.
Which is just a perfect setup. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone. We've got an incredible stack of sources in front of us today, specifically excerpts from Morgan Housel's brilliant book, The Psychology of Money.
It's such a great book.
It really is. And our mission today is custom tailored for you. Whether you're a young professional trying to build your career or an entrepreneur navigating the startup chaos, or just someone trying to figure out why your financial life feels so stressful right now.
We are going to decode the actual psychology of financial behavior.
Yes. We're going to explore why soft skills matter way more than technical knowledge. We'll look at the difference between being rich and being wealthy, the hidden mechanics of compounding, and ultimately how to use your money to buy back your time.
And that mission is so critical because, frankly, we tend to operate under a fundamental misunderstanding of what money actually is.
How so?
Well, we approach personal finance and investing like they're physics, like they're governed by these immutable laws and perfect rationality. But the source material makes this really compelling case that finance is actually much closer to psychology and history.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if money is a soft skill, if human behavior is the ultimate deciding factor in who goes bankrupt and who leaves millions to a library, why do we insist on teaching finance like it's pure math?
Right.
I mean, when you go to school or read a finance blog, you just get formulas. Save 10%, put 60% in equities, keep a 6-month emergency fund. The equation spits out an answer and you're just supposed to do it.
Well, the formulas themselves are mathematically incorrect. The friction happens because knowing what to do mathematically tells you absolutely nothing about what goes on inside your head when you actually try to execute that plan in the real world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We see people making financial decisions all the time that look completely irrational from the outside. People burying themselves in high-interest credit card debt for stuff they don't need.
Or hoarding cash under a mattress while inflation just eats it alive.
Exactly. Or day traders betting their entire retirement on one volatile tech stock. And society's immediate reflex is to just label those people as crazy. But the text introduces this really profound, empathetic framework. No one is actually crazy.
That's a massive paradigm shift. If they aren't crazy, what's driving that behavior?
Everyone makes financial decisions based on their own unique, deeply personal experience of how the world works at any given moment.
Okay.
The trap is that your personal experiences with money make up an infinitesimally small fraction of what has actually happened in the world. The text estimates it at roughly 0.0000001% of global financial history.
That is basically nothing.
It's nothing. Yet those exact same limited personal experiences make up about 80% of how you construct your internal model of how the world operates.
So we are all basically walking around with massive cognitive blind spots, completely convinced that our tiny little slice of reality is the absolute truth.
Yes. And the text backs this up with some incredible historical data. There's a study from the National Bureau of Economic Research by economists Ulrich Malmendier and Stefan Nagel.
Oh, I loved this part.
It's brilliant. They didn't just look at theoretical models. They dug through 50 years of data from the Survey of Consumer Finances. Now, classical economics says a rational person should make investment decisions based strictly on their current goals and the math of the current market.
Right, the whole spreadsheet approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Malmendier and Nagel found that an individual's willingness to bear risk depends almost entirely on their personal history, specifically the macroeconomic conditions they experienced early in their adult lives.
So like when they first started making money.
Right. If you entered your working years during a period of runaway inflation like the late 1970s, you invested significantly less of your money in bonds later in life, regardless of what the current bond yields were.
Because if you lived through the 70s, you literally watched inflation devour the purchasing power of your parents' savings. To you, a bond isn't a safe investment. It's a wealth incinerator. It represents danger.
And conversely, if you came of age when inflation was low and stable, you were much more comfortable holding bonds. The text actually mentions Bill Gross, the legendary bond manager.
Right. He openly recognized this.
He did. He admitted that if he had been born a decade earlier or a decade later, his legendary career might never have happened. His early career perfectly coincided with a generational collapse in interest rates, which mathematically causes bond prices to soar.
So to Bill Gross, based on his specific window of life experience, bonds were phenomenal wealth-generating machines. But to his father's generation, they look like a guaranteed way to lose your purchasing power.
Exactly. Your birth year is just sheer dumb luck, but it fundamentally rewires your financial psychology.
The stock market is another crazy example of this.
Oh.
Think about two hypothetical investors, one born in 1950 and the other born in 1970.
Okay.
If you were born in 1970, the S&P 500 increased almost tenfold during your teens and 20s. So your foundational memory is watching the stock market consistently march upward, minting millionaires out of ordinary people. You're naturally wired to view the stock market as a reliable engine of prosperity.
But if you were born in 1950, the market went literally nowhere adjusted for inflation during your most formative young adult years.
Right. You spent your teens and 20s watching people invest hard-earned money and get absolutely zero return on it for over a decade.
Those two individuals, separated only by the random chance of their birth year, are going to navigate their entire lives with completely different views on equities. And the crucial point here is that you cannot simply educate that foundational experience out of someone.
You can't just hand them a spreadsheet.
No, you can't sit the person born in 1950 down, show them a century of historical averages, and expect them to suddenly feel the same visceral optimism as the person born in 1970.
This disconnect scales all the way up, too. Like, the text shares this very revealing anecdote about John F. Kennedy during the 1960 presidential election.
Oh, this is a great story.
A reporter asked him what he remembered about the Great Depression, which, was the defining economic trauma of an entire generation.
Right. It scarred millions of people permanently.
But JFK admitted that he had no firsthand knowledge of it at all. His family possessed one of the great fortunes of the world. So during the 1930s, while the country is literally starving, the Kennedy family actually moved into bigger houses. They employed more servants.
Wow.
JFK said the only direct evidence he saw of the Depression was his father hiring some extra gardeners just to give them a job so they could eat. He explicitly stated that he did not truly learn about the Great Depression until he read about it in a textbook at Harvard.
Which was a massive political liability for him.
Hmm?
The electorate was like, how can a leader with absolutely zero emotional understanding of the worst economic disaster of the century be trusted to manage the economy?
He only overcame it because of World War II, which gave him a different shared emotional trauma with the public. But the lesson for us is really about empathy, right?
Yeah.
When you see a peer or a business partner making a financial choice that seems completely illogical to you, you have to realize their internal framework was forged in a different crucible than yours.
That's spot on.
But okay, let's unpack this, because I want to push back on this idea just a bit, specifically on behalf of the young professional listening to this right now.
Sure.
We are living in the information age. We aren't relying on limited local experiences anymore. We have access to centuries of pristine market data right on our phones.
Mm-hmm.
If the historical data definitively mathematically proves that the U.S. stock market returns an average of around 6.8% annually after inflation over the long term, shouldn't a smart young person just ignore their personal biases, follow the math, and stay invested? Isn't math just math?
What's fascinating here is that your logic is flawless regarding the math, but it completely misjudges the reality of the human nervous system.
Okay, how so?
The text addresses this exact friction between data and emotion. A spreadsheet can perfectly model the historic frequency of stock market declines. It can calmly display that a 20 or 30% drop happens every few years, and it always recovers.
Right.
What that spreadsheet absolutely cannot model, however, is the visceral, sickening adrenaline spike of coming home from work, logging into your brokerage account, seeing your net worth cut in half, and wondering if your investment strategy just permanently ruined your children's future.
Oof. Yeah, that is a harsh reality check. The spreadsheet doesn't factor in the physical sensation of panic sweats at 3 a.m.
Exactly. It doesn't factor in the tension at the dinner table when your spouse looks at you with genuine fear, or the sudden terror of your company announcing layoffs right when your portfolio is down 40%.
It's all real-world context.
The author quotes the financial writer Michael Batnick, who says, "Some lessons have to be experienced before they can be truly understood. You can read every book about the 2008 crash. You can intellectually map out how it happened, but unless you have personally lived through the consequences, unless you carry that emotional scar tissue, you probably won't understand it on a deep enough level to change your behavior when the next crisis hits."
We really do operate under this delusion that we are perfectly rational, calculating machines. But we're highly emotional creatures trying to navigate a financial system that is shockingly new to our species.
We forget how new all of this is. The 401k didn't even exist until 1978. Index funds are barely 50 years old. Widespread consumer debt, like 30-year mortgages and credit cards, only became a staple after World War II.
So humanity is essentially winging it.
Completely winging it. We haven't had the time to evolve the psychological hardware necessary to handle this flawlessly.
So if our personal lens is always distorting our behavior and our emotional hardware is mismatched with the modern system, what is the single most important behavior we need to cultivate?
It boils down to one highly unglamorous trait: patience. Because patience is the master key that unlocks the single most powerful mathematical force in finance: compounding.
Compounding. The ultimate financial time machine.
It is the engine that drove Ronald Read's success. But it's incredibly difficult for us to grasp because humans are biologically wired to think linearly, whereas wealth grows exponentially.
The text uses a fantastic thought experiment for this. If I ask you to calculate 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, adding 8 to itself 9 times, your brain processes that linearly in seconds. You get 72.
Easy.
But if I ask you to calculate 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, doing that multiplication 9 times, your brain just short circuits. You can't intuitively guess the answer, which is over 134 million.
We grasp trading 1 hour of work for 1 hour of pay. But exponential growth feels like an error in the matrix. And this neurological blind spot is why we completely misunderstand the success of someone like Warren Buffett.
Right, Buffett is the quintessential case study. There are thousands of books dissecting his strategies, how he reads balance sheets, his criteria for undervalued companies.
But they miss the simplest variable. His secret isn't just that he's a brilliant investor. It's that he's been a brilliant investor for over 3/4 of a century. He started as a child.
The mathematical breakdown of his wealth completely shifted my perspective. At the time the book was written, his net worth was roughly $84.5 billion. Out of that $84.5 billion, an astonishing $81.5 billion came after his 65th birthday.
Let that sink in. The vast majority of the greatest individual fortune in modern investing was accumulated during the years when most people are already retired.
It totally changes how you view his success. He's a master of endurance. The text runs this hypothetical scenario. What if Buffett had lived a normal life? What if he traveled in his 20s and only started investing at 30 with like $25,000?
Okay.
And let's assume he still got his unbelievable 22% annual returns, but he retired at 60 to play golf. If he followed that timeline, his net worth wouldn't be $84.5 billion. It would be roughly $11.9 million.
That is 99.9% less than his actual net worth.
Yes. His technical skills evaluating businesses, but his true superpower is time. You have to focus intensely on the uninterrupted duration of the growth.
Which brings up a brilliant analogy the author uses from planetary science regarding ice ages. Historically, scientists thought ice ages must have been triggered by massively extreme catastrophic events, like huge shifts in the Earth's orbit causing brutal winters.
But the reality is much more subtle.
Right. It wasn't the extreme winters that caused the ice ages. It was the relatively cool summers.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to make sure the listener fully grasps the mechanics of this analogy.
It's elegant in its simplicity. You have a summer that never quite gets warm enough to melt all of the previous winter's snow. So a very thin layer of ice survives. The next winter, more snow falls on top of it. Because the ice is highly reflective, it bounces more of the sun's radiation back into space.
Which subtly cools the planet even further.
Exactly. This localized cooling makes the next summer even cooler, allowing a thicker layer to survive. It feeds on itself in a continuous loop. You don't need a cataclysmic deep freeze. You just need a tiny amount of leftover ice to stick around year after year. Given enough time, that minuscule layer compounds into a massive glacier that reshapes continents.
Which perfectly maps onto building a financial portfolio. You don't need to hit a grand slam on a penny stock or time the top of a crypto bubble. You just need consistent positive returns over a very long time horizon.
But there is a massive catch.
The survival aspect.
Yes. To let that ice compound, it has to survive the heat of the summer. To let your money compound, you have to survive the inevitable chaos and drawdowns of the markets. There is a massive difference between getting wealthy and staying wealthy.
They require two completely different, almost contradictory psychological skill sets.
Getting money requires taking risks, optimism, and aggressively believing your ideas are better than the markets. But keeping money, That requires the exact opposite: frugality, humility, and a persistent, low-level sense of paranoia. You have to be aware that everything could be taken away from you.
The sources highlight Jesse Livermore to show what happens when you only have one of those skill sets. Early 20th century, widely considered the greatest trader alive. By 30, he had the equivalent of $100 million. In 1929, when the market crashed, he actually anticipated it and shorted the market. While everyone else lost everything, he made billions in a matter of days.
He mastered getting wealthy, but he was fundamentally incapable of holding on to it.
Exactly. The success poisoned his psychology. He became overconfident, made riskier, highly leveraged bets, and within a few short years, lost every single penny. He went bankrupt and tragically took his own life. He had zero survival skills.
For a successful modern counterpart, the text points to Michael Moritz, the venture capitalist at Sequoia Capital. They've backed Apple, Google, Airbnb, just dominant for decades. When asked the secret to their sustained success, Moritz didn't point to raw intelligence or deal-making.
What did he say?
He simply said, "I think we've always been afraid of going out of business." They operate with the assumption that yesterday's success guarantees absolutely nothing about tomorrow.
Think of it like planting an oak tree. You plant an acorn, and for a year, you see nothing. 10 years go by, it's a decent sapling. Give it 50 years, you get a majestic tree.
Right.
But if at year 20 you get bored or you get scared because there's a drought and you chop it down, the mathematical magic completely resets. You have to start over from day one. Compounding only works if you never interrupt it unnecessarily.
And the temptation to interrupt it is constant. The market drops 20%, your brain screams to liquidate to stop the pain. Or you see a neighbor flipping a speculative asset, greed takes over, and you cash out your boring index funds. Both reactions result in chopping down your oak tree.
So to let it work, you have to organize your life, your debts, fixed expenses, cash reserves, so you can physically and emotionally survive the crashes.
Survival must be the bedrock of your strategy.
If survival is that critical, why do so many smart professionals fail at it?
Because they confuse being rich with being wealthy, and their ego takes the steering wheel. We are programmed by consumer culture to conflate the visual signals of spending money with the actual possession of money.
Our author shares a highly relatable story from his youth about this. He worked as a valet at a luxury hotel in LA. Guests would roll up in Ferraris and Rolls Royces, and as a young guy, he dreamed of owning one. The logic was, if you drive a Ferrari, it sends a signal. Look at me, I'm successful.
But after observing this for a while, he realized a deep irony. When a Ferrari drives past you, you almost never look at the driver and think, "Wow, that person is cool." Instead, you look past the driver, stare at the car, and think, "Wow, if I were driving that car, people would think I was cool."
The man in the car paradox?
Exactly. No one is ever as impressed with your possessions as you are.
Which brings us to the structural difference between rich and wealthy. We use them interchangeably, but they aren't the same.
Not at all. Rich is a measure of current, visible income. Someone driving a $100,000 car is rich because you need high cash flow for that lease. Rich people are easy to spot.
But wealth is invisible.
Yes, wealth is what you don't see. Wealth is the expensive car not purchased, the upgrade politely declined. It's the money sitting quietly in index funds. Wealth is the accumulation of unspent optionality.
There's a quote in the text about Rihanna that perfectly highlights this. A few years ago, she nearly went bankrupt because she was blowing through her massive fortune on lavish expenses. She actually sued her financial advisor.
And his response was brutal, but perfect.
Right. He said, was it really necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money?
It exposes a massive behavioral blind spot. When people say they want to be a millionaire, they actually mean they want to spend $1 million, which is literally the exact opposite of being a millionaire.
But it's hard to find wealthy role models because true wealth is hidden. You see the guy with the gold Rolex. You don't see the person in the 10-year-old sedan with $2 million compounding in Vanguard.
Capitalism is brilliant at helping people fake it till they make it. It thrives on social comparison and the moving goalpost.
The moving goalpost is so toxic. Think about a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year. He's incredibly rich, but his locker is next to Mike Trout, making $36 million a year.
So the rookie feels broke.
And Trout goes to a gala and sits next to a hedge fund manager making $340 million. Trout feels inadequate. And the hedge fund manager compares himself to Warren Buffett. It's a ladder with no top.
You can never reach the ceiling. The only way to win that game is to consciously refuse to play it. You have to define what enough means for you.
I love the diet analogy for this. Exercise is like being rich, putting in the grueling work, burning calories, but as soon as you finish, your brain says, I earned a pizza. Wealth is turning down that massive treat. That restraint is the only way you create a caloric deficit.
Wealth is simply the gap between your ego and your income.
So, what does this mean for the young professional or entrepreneur listening? What is the actual ROI of just leaving money sitting invisibly in a bank account?
This is arguably the most valuable revelation in the research. The highest dividend money pays is absolute control over your own time.
The academic research on this is fascinating. Psychologist Angus Campbell wanted to study what made people happy. He looked at income, geography, education.
And none of those were the common denominator.
Exactly. There were miserable rich people and miserable poor people. The one undeniable common denominator among truly happy people was a strong, persistent sense of autonomy, being in control of their own daily lives.
And this is where wealth becomes a superpower. It buys back your time. A small emergency fund means you can take a sick day without a panic attack.
6 months of savings means if you get laid off, you don't have to take the first toxic job offer that comes along. You have the flexibility to wait for a good fit.
Carl Pillemer interviewed hundreds of elderly Americans looking back on their lives. None of them wished they'd worked harder for more money or status. They universally valued spending unstructured, unhurried time with their kids.
Young professionals today face a radically different landscape. We've gone from a local economy to a global, hyper-competitive economy. You're competing against the smartest people on the planet and increasingly against AI.
So your technical skills aren't the impenetrable moat they used to be. Your biggest competitive edge is flexibility, and flexibility is purchased exclusively with savings.
So why do we restrict ourselves by only saving for specific things, like a house or a car?
We shouldn't. You don't need a specific reason to save. Accumulating savings is the ultimate hedge against a world that will inevitably surprise you.
We're taught to constantly optimize. We see cash earning 0% interest and think it's inefficient. But the text argues the holistic ROI on that 0% cash is incalculable.
Because it's the currency of flexibility. If that cash lets you quit a toxic job to save your mental health, the ROI is infinite. If it lets you patiently wait 2 years for the perfect business acquisition while leveraged competitors take bad deals, it's priceless.
Once your basic needs are met, every additional dollar you spend is realistically just your ego approaching your income. If you can suppress that ego, your savings rate explodes and you buy sovereign control over your destiny.
But executing this over a 30-year career is incredibly difficult. We aren't emotionless spreadsheets. We have to stop trying to be perfectly rational robots and start planning for our plans to fail.
Which brings us to Julius Wagner Jauregg, one of the most bizarre anecdotes in the book. Late 1800s, neurosyphilis is a fatal disease. Julius notices some patients who contracted severe fevers like malaria actually recovered from syphilis.
The extreme body heat was cooking the syphilis bacteria, a scientifically sound mechanism.
So he decides to intentionally inject terminal syphilis patients with active strains of malaria to induce massive fevers. And it actually worked. He won a Nobel Prize for it.
There was just one glaring problem.
The induced malaria frequently killed the patients before the syphilis could.
It is the ultimate example of a strategy that is flawlessly rational on paper, but completely unreasonable in practice. It makes logical sense to induce a fever, but it's unreasonable to give a patient a deadly disease to do it.
And we can apply this to finance. Academic finance tells you to use leverage when young, stay 100% in equities, constantly rebalance. But humans don't want the mathematically optimal strategy because it often requires stomach-churning volatility.
Humans want the strategy that maximizes how well they sleep at night. You should aim to be reasonable, not coldly rational.
Look at Harry Markowitz. He won the Nobel Prize for inventing modern portfolio theory, the mathematically optimal way to balance risk. But when asked how he invested his own money, he admitted he didn't use his own formulas.
He visualized his future grief. He split his money 50-50 between stocks and bonds just to minimize his potential for psychological pain. It wasn't rational, but it was highly reasonable.
Which highlights room for error. Professional blackjack card counters don't predict the next card perfectly, they just play the odds. But even with the odds in their favor, they can still lose hands.
So their most critical rule is bankroll management, ensuring they have a massive margin of safety so a string of bad luck doesn't wipe them out.
Bill Gates understood this. At Microsoft, he required the company to keep enough cash in the bank to cover an entire year of payroll, even with zero revenue.
Which is absurdly conservative for a tech startup. But it was his margin of safety. He used a barbell strategy. Take aggressive risks on one end, but be hyper-conservative on the other.
So for our listeners, don't burn the boats and go all in on a risky startup with no safety net. Keep your stable 9 to 5 job the conservative side and build the risky startup on nights and weekends. Leverage is the enemy of the survival mindset.
We also need room for error because of the end of history illusion. We know we've changed in the past, but we arrogantly believe our current self is the finished, permanent version of who we are.
Right. A 5-year-old wants to be a tractor driver. At 18, a lawyer. At 30, a teacher. We constantly evolve, so a rigid 20-year financial plan based on what you want today is almost guaranteed to break.
Which is why extreme financial strategies fail. If you live a miserable, penny-pinching life in your 20s just to retire at 30, you might deeply regret missing your youth. Maintaining moderation gives your future self the flexibility to pivot without regret.
But even with moderation, the stock market is emotionally painful. How do we process a massive drawdown without panicking?
We have to reframe market volatility. Look at the Disneyland ticket analogy. When you pay $100 to get into Disneyland, you don't view it as a fine for doing something wrong. It's the admission fee for a worthwhile experience.
But when the stock market drops 20%, we treat it as a fine. And human nature dictates we avoid fines at all costs, so we sell at the bottom to stop the pain.
The historical reality is that the stock market is the greatest wealth-building engine in history. And the admission fee is not paid in cash. It is paid in volatility, fear, and uncertainty.
If you reframe that 20% drop as the necessary fee to double your money over the next decade, you stop trying to avoid the ride.
You must recognize the true price of financial success and willingly pay it.
So to summarize, finance isn't a math test. It's a behavioral battle with your ego. Survival gives compounding the decades it needs. Wealth is what you don't see. And the highest dividend money pays is autonomy. Be reasonable, not rational.
But there's one final, crucial concept to leave the listener with. We constantly witness seemingly irrational financial bubbles. We see day traders paying insane valuations for unprofitable tech stocks, and we think they're crazy.
But they aren't crazy. They're just playing a different game.
Exactly. A long-term investor is buying based on cash flows over the next 30 years. But the day trader only cares if the stock goes up before lunchtime based on momentum. For their specific game, paying that valuation makes rational sense.
The disaster happens when the prudent long-term investor takes cues from the day trader. You get FOMO, abandon your carefully constructed game, and buy speculative assets at ridiculous prices. But the day trader will ruthlessly exit when momentum shifts, leaving you holding the bag.
Blindly copying people playing a different game is catastrophic. The talking head on TV doesn't know if you're a 19-year-old day trader or an 80-year-old widow.
So the final provocative thought for you to ponder this week: look at your career, your business, and your portfolio, and ask yourself, whose game are you actually playing? Are you playing the status game to impress people, the day trader game for dopamine hits, or your own game, using money patiently to buy back your independence?
Define your own game, and it becomes incredibly easy to ignore the noise.
You don't need the massive leverage that ruined Richard Fuscone. You just need the quiet, unshakable patience of Ronald Read, sweeping floors, ignoring the noise, and letting time do the heavy lifting. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.